Welcome to Grandpa Harry's Story Forge. Let me tell you about the day my own daughter and her husband thought they could cross a line they would regret forever. It was Christmas dinner. The tree smelled like pine and sugar cookies. The lights twinkled softly, and the house felt warm. That warmth didn't last long. My daughter Sarah glared at me across the table. "You're being selfish, Dad. You're being cruel," she screamed, voice sharper than the crackling fire in the fireplace. Before I could answer, her husband, hands like bricks, grabbed a ceramic coffee mug and threw it straight at my face. It smashed against the wall behind me. Shards tinkled across the floor like tiny alarms. I felt blood drip from my forehead. Pain? Sure. Anger? Sure. Fear? Not a chance. I calmly grabbed my keys, got up, and drove to Vancouver General Hospital, and while blood ran down my temple, I texted my lawyer. Phase 1 is complete. Proceed with Phase 2. What happened after that? Well, they got arrested, and that was just the beginning. If you think family is safe, think again. This is the story of betrayal, blood, and the quiet justice that follows when the wronged rise up. When I arrived at the hospital, I could still feel the sting of the mug, the heat of my daughter's words, and the disbelief in the air. Nurses stared as I walked in, holding my head, blood trickling between my fingers. Sarah followed, furious. "Dad, you're acting insane!" she shouted, but I didn't flinch. I didn't yell back. Calm is the weapon no one expects. I texted my lawyer again, giving precise details. All set. They'll learn the truth. My hands were steady, even though the pain throbbed behind my eyes. Minutes later, hospital security arrived. They weren't there to stop me. They were there to protect the witnesses, my daughter and her husband, who still hadn't grasped that this night wasn't about temper tantrums. Then my phone buzzed. My lawyer's name flashed on the screen. I read the message and smiled quietly. Phase 2 in motion. Sit back. And just like that, the first wave of consequences began. The people who thought they could harm me without repercussion were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. The hours after that mug hit my head were some of the longest I've ever lived. Sarah and her husband sat in the waiting area, fuming and whispering to each other like children caught stealing cookies. I, meanwhile, was calm. Pain throbbed in my forehead, but every beat reminded me that I was still alive and still in control of what would happen next. The nurse patched me up quickly, dabbing at the blood and applying antiseptic. The smell was sharp and medicinal, but I didn't flinch. Every movement reminded me that this was my body, my life, my choices, and no one was taking it from me. I pulled out my phone and opened the chat with my lawyer. Phase 1 complete. Proceed with Phase 2. A subtle shiver ran through me, not of fear, but of anticipation. Justice is a patient creature. It waits, it watches, and then it strikes. Minutes later, security escorted my daughter and her husband into a private room. They still didn't realize I had already started the first moves of what would become a domino effect. I stayed nearby, seated quietly, watching their frustration bubble. Sarah's voice finally cracked. "Dad, you can't be serious. You're insane." I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath. Maybe. Or maybe I'm the only one who remembers how to stay calm when everyone else loses their mind. Her husband tried to step closer, but hospital staff kept him back. His anger was palpable. I could feel it in the room like static electricity. I let it hang there, thick and suffocating, because sometimes the weight of consequences is heavier than any hammer or mug. Hours passed. My lawyer called with updates. Phase 2 is underway. They'll be served shortly. I didn't need to ask what that meant. I had spent years learning the patience required for real justice. Instant gratification is for amateurs. When the legal notices arrived, the staff delivered them with polite detachment. My daughter and her husband read each word, their eyes widening as the reality sank in. Every signature, every document they had tried to manipulate, was now under scrutiny. Fraud, assault, emotional abuse. The list was long, meticulous, and entirely verifiable. Sarah looked at me then, rage shifting into panic. "Dad, what are you doing?" I smiled softly, letting the calmness of someone who has survived decades of deception settle over her like fog. I'm reminding you that actions have consequences. That when you throw a mug, scream insults, or try to control someone else's life, the universe has a way of balancing the scales. Her husband swore under his breath, a mix of frustration and fear. That fear was beautiful, not cruel, but deserved. It's a feeling you can't manufacture. It has to be earned. And they earned it that night. By evening, security had cleared the hospital of any lingering chaos. I sat in my room, head still throbbing, blood mostly cleaned, and watched the city lights outside. My phone buzzed again, another message from my lawyer. Court documents filed, arrest warrants issued. I allowed myself a small smile. The mug had shattered more than just the ceramic. It had broken the illusion of control they thought they held over me. And now, quietly, methodically, the law was stepping in to finish what I had begun. Sarah's voice finally softened, but only slightly. "Dad, please, can't we just talk?" I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of sadness and resolve. "We could talk, if honesty had been part of your plan, but you chose rage, violence, and betrayal instead. The only conversation left is the one that happens in court." That night, I slept in the hospital chair next to my room, fully dressed, shoes on. I don't know if I ever felt more alive. My forehead still throbbed, but my mind was sharp. Every decision I'd made up to this point had been calculated, precise, and necessary. And somewhere in the quiet hours, as the hum of the ventilators filled the hallways, I realized the mug was just the beginning. They thought they could attack me, frighten me, control me. Instead, they had set the stage for the biggest lesson they would ever learn about respect, power, and consequences. By the time morning came, the first legal officers had arrived. Arrest warrants were served. My daughter and her husband were officially in trouble. The look on their faces as they realized that what they did had real consequences. That realization alone was priceless. I didn't celebrate. I didn't laugh. I just sat back, tired but content, knowing that justice doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers and then it hits with precision. That night, alone in my hospital chair, I whispered to myself, Phase 1 complete, Phase 2 delivered, and the rest is just history in the making. The next morning the city seemed quieter than usual, but inside Vancouver General, chaos had found a different rhythm. My daughter and her husband had been officially served, and the news had traveled fast through the hospital grapevine. Even the nurses whispered when they passed my room like they were watching a live thriller unfold. I sat in my chair, still lightly bandaged, sipping a cup of tea I had insisted they brew fresh, not the hospital sludge, and I watched Sarah pace outside the door. Her husband, Mark, followed, looking like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him had turned to quicksand. When the lawyer arrived, I let him handle the introductions. Patrick, calm as always, explained the legal implications: fraud, assault, emotional abuse, unauthorized control of finances. The list was meticulous, leaving no room for negotiation or excuse. I didn't need to say a word. The weight of truth did that for me. Sarah came in first. Her eyes were wide, but the fire in them was now tinged with panic. "Dad, please," she said. "This is all so extreme. Can't we just work something out?" I shook my head slowly. "Work something out? You threw a mug at my face. You screamed I was cruel while plotting to take control of my life. Work something out? No, Sarah. This is about accountability." Mark stepped forward, trying to assert control, but the look on his face betrayed him. He wasn't prepared for reality to hit so hard, and he certainly wasn't prepared for me to remain calm, even serene, as the law moved quietly but decisively around him. Patrick laid out the upcoming court dates, the restraining orders, and the charges. I listened with the patience of someone who has lived through betrayal before. You see, patience is underrated. People think it's weakness, but it's not. It's control. It's strategy. Hours passed. Sarah's desperation grew. "You're hurting me," she said, voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" I smiled gently, almost sadly. "Because I love you, but love doesn't mean I allow people to hurt me or think they can control me. The law does what love sometimes can't." The micro-twists began to appear almost immediately. Mark had hidden assets, thinking no one would uncover them. Sarah had forged my signature on documents she thought I would never see. Every lie, every deceit, came to light in careful, undeniable chunks. Patrick had prepared every piece, anticipating every possible excuse, and now it was unfolding perfectly. By the afternoon, the hospital had become a silent arena. Nurses and administrators watched as documents were signed, verified, and logged. The tension in the room was electric, like the calm before a storm, the kind where you know lightning is coming but can't predict exactly where it will strike. Sarah's face paled when she realized the depth of her errors. "Dad, we didn't know it was this serious," she whispered. I leaned forward, voice soft but sharp. "You did know. That's why you tried to manipulate me. That's why you thought a mug and a scream would silence me. But here we are, and nothing you do will undo what has already been set in motion." Mark's jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. Fear is a strange thing. It's heavy, almost tangible. You can see it in someone's posture, hear it in the tremble of their voice, and feel it in the air. I had seen fear before, but nothing like this. Nothing born from understanding that karma isn't theoretical, it's real. Patrick handed me the documents that confirmed their criminal liability. The forged signatures, the financial manipulations. I didn't open them immediately. I let them linger on the table, as if giving Sarah and Mark a moment to absorb the consequences themselves. Then I spoke. "You had a chance to do the right thing when I was hurt, when I was vulnerable, when I trusted you. You failed. You chose rage, deceit, and betrayal. And now, the rest of the world will see exactly what you are." The room went quiet. Administrators, nurses, and even a few curious visitors had gathered outside the glass doors. They were witnessing the downfall of people who thought they could act without consequence, and the unfolding justice was like a slow-motion movie. Sarah's voice finally cracked. "Dad, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I shook my head. Forgiveness doesn't erase actions. Consequences do. And consequences are happening. Patrick nudged me. "Harry, the court is ready to move forward. Shall we proceed?" I nodded. Calm, steady, ready. Justice, I realized, is not loud. It doesn't need shouting or threats. It moves quietly, methodically, and with precision. And tonight, my family would witness that principle firsthand. As the legal wheels began turning, I felt a strange combination of relief and sorrow. Relief, because the betrayal was finally being addressed. Sorrow, because family isn't supposed to come to this point. But when people choose betrayal over love, the story must follow its natural course. Later, alone in my hospital room, I sipped my tea and reflected. The pain in my forehead had dulled, but the memory of the mug, the screaming, the betrayal lingered. It was a reminder of why patience, strategy, and calm are far more powerful than anger, yelling, or retaliation. And as I closed my eyes that night, I whispered softly, "Phase 1 was just the beginning. Phase 2 has begun. The rest will be unforgettable." The next morning I woke early, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, catching the dust in the room like tiny golden motes. Even the quiet of dawn felt heavier that day, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Sarah and Mark were to appear in court within hours, and I could almost taste the tension in the air, not just from the law, but from the storm I'd quietly set in motion. When I arrived at the courthouse, I noticed the subtle stares, some curious, some sympathetic, some plain judgmental. I walked with steady steps, even though my forehead still throbbed faintly from the mug. Pain can't break you if your mind refuses to be broken first. I had learned that decades ago, and tonight's lesson was proving it again. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of polished wood and anxious coffee. Sarah and Mark looked smaller than ever, hunched and defensive, aware of the evidence stacked against them like a mountain they couldn't climb. Patrick stood beside me, calm, almost serene, like he knew the story was already won. The hearing began. My daughter tried to speak first, her voice trembling. "Dad, I held up a hand, not in anger, but in measured control. "Sarah, stop. This isn't about words anymore. It's about actions. You threw a mug. You called me cruel. You tried to take control of my life. Actions speak louder than any apology. Mark muttered something under his breath. Patrick quietly reminded him to speak clearly for the record. The judge's gavel struck, echoing in the room, and I felt a strange calmness settle over me. I'd survived betrayal before, but never so close, never so intimate, never so sharp. And yet here I was, completely in control. The first piece of evidence was delivered, hospital reports detailing the assault. Then came the bank statements, accounts siphoned, documents forged, every move meticulously documented, showing intent, malice, and deception. I watched Sarah's face turn pale as Patrick laid each piece of proof gently but firmly on the table. "You see, Your Honor," Patrick said, "these actions are not isolated. They are part of a calculated attempt to manipulate and harm the defendant, Harry Reynolds, while he was incapacitated and vulnerable. Every signature, every transaction, every attempt to gain control has been verified and recorded." I felt a strange satisfaction, not from vengeance itself, but from seeing truth move like a tide, inevitable, unstoppable, and clear. The micro-twists kept coming. Hidden assets, last-minute confessions, overlooked text messages, all building a mosaic of betrayal they hadn't expected to be uncovered. Sarah finally broke down. "Dad, we didn't realize—" I let her finish, though her words had no weight here. The court had the evidence, and I had patience. "Don't," I said softly. "Your remorse doesn't erase what you did. Consequences do, and they're happening now." Mark's lawyer tried to intervene, attempting to paint a picture of temporary rage and misunderstanding, but the court had everything laid bare. Witnesses confirmed the mug, the yelling, the forged documents. Even hospital staff provided testimony about the immediate threats and the atmosphere in the emergency room that night. Hours passed. The tension was almost unbearable, but I stayed calm. Every micro-reveal, every twist landed with precision. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling. Mark realized that his attempts to intimidate me had failed. Fear had replaced anger in both of them, a justified, palpable fear. Patrick leaned in quietly. "Harry, they're going to get the message. This is about to end cleanly." I nodded, sipping water, letting the calm soak into my bones. I could almost hear the echo of the mug hitting the wall, the scream in my ears, and feel the cold dread that had lingered since that Christmas dinner. And yet, I was no longer a victim. I was an observer of justice finally catching up. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, Sarah and Mark were both pale, exhausted, and visibly shaken. Patrick patted my shoulder. "Phase 3 begins tomorrow," he said with a subtle smile. I left the courtroom feeling a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. Family isn't supposed to come to this point, but when betrayal strikes, patience and strategy are the only armor that truly protects you. The night air outside the courthouse felt cool and cleansing. I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet before the next storm, the final reckoning. That evening back at home, I sat by the fire, forehead still tender but spirit intact. My wife came in quietly, bringing a cup of tea. She watched me for a long moment, her eyes soft with understanding and empathy. "Harry, you did what had to be done," she said gently. I nodded, looking into the flames. "Yes, but it never feels easy. Justice isn't just about the law. It's about surviving betrayal, keeping calm when everyone else loses their mind, and making sure the people who hurt you see the weight of their actions." She smiled faintly, brushing my hair back. "And now they will. You survived everything. That's what matters." I let her words sink in. The pain, the betrayal, the mug, the screams. It was all part of a story now. A story that would stay with me forever. A story that proved that when the wronged rise up, justice doesn't just arrive. It strikes quietly, inevitably, and with perfect timing. As I sipped my tea that night, I whispered softly to myself, Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, almost complete. And when it ends, they will remember everything they did, every choice they made, every moment they underestimated me. The morning sunlight felt sharp as I arrived at the courthouse again. Today was the day it all concluded. The day the people who thought they could hurt me without consequence would see the full weight of their actions. My forehead still throbbed faintly from the mug, but every ache was a reminder that I had survived, that I was still standing. Sarah and Mark arrived, visibly smaller than ever. Their shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of guilt, fear, and anticipation. They had spent nights calculating, strategizing, hoping they could twist the story to their favor. But the truth, as I had learned long ago, cannot be bent forever. It waits patiently, and then it strikes. Patrick handed over the final documents, the arrest warrants, the restitution orders, the detailed account of all the fraudulent activity, every forged signature, every attempt to manipulate me, every lie, now laid bare in black and white. The judge read aloud the charges, each one cutting through the room like a hammer. Assault, fraud, emotional abuse, unauthorized control of finances. By the time the last charge landed, I felt nothing but calm. I had no need for gloating. I had no need for vindication. I simply let the law do its work. Sarah's face went pale. "Dad, please," she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of reality. I shook my head gently. "Sarah, forgiveness doesn't erase actions. Consequences do, and yours have arrived." Mark tried to speak, tried to claim misunderstanding, temporary rage, anything to soften the blow. But Patrick had anticipated every argument. Every loophole had been closed. Every excuse had already been met with irrefutable evidence. Security escorted them out. I watched, calm, as their world shifted beneath their feet. Fear replaced anger. Panic replaced pride. And for the first time that Christmas, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from vengeance, but from justice done. Afterwards, I walked out of the courthouse into the cool air, sunlight warming my face, and felt a strange sense of liberation. Betrayal hurts, but justice heals, and that day I was healed. I went home to my wife, the woman who had stood by me through the quiet betrayals of life, the one who had held my hand when everyone else turned away. I told her everything, the mug, the screams, the text to my lawyer, the arrests, every detail. She listened, quiet at first, her eyes reflecting a mixture of shock and relief. Finally, she reached for my hand. "Harry, you survived everything they did. That makes you the richest man I know." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of tension finally lift. "Not the money," I said softly. "The truth, and the calm to see it through. That's what matters." We sat together by the fire, the room smelling faintly of cedar and tea, the house finally feeling like a sanctuary again. I realized then that betrayal doesn't have to define your life. Strategy, patience, and courage can turn the worst of circumstances into lessons and victories. That night, I whispered quietly to myself, as I often do, Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 complete, and the rest will be remembered forever. And to anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone who has felt the sting of betrayal or the fear of being powerless, let me leave you with this. Life will test you. People will try to hurt you, to manipulate you, to take what you've earned. But if you stay calm, stay smart, and let justice, quiet, patient, inevitable justice, do its work, you'll not only survive, you'll rise. Something I learned over decades of being underestimated, ignored, and underestimated again. The quietest moves often have the loudest impact, and sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth take its course. So remember this when someone underestimates you. Someone tries to throw a mug at your life. Stay calm, stay patient, and let the world see exactly who you are and who they really are. Because in the end, the law, truth, and patience always find a way, and you, my friend, will be there to watch it unfold. An old man's 2 cents. Stay calm, plan carefully, and never forget. Justice is quiet, but devastatingly effective.